Hey, people from around the world. How are you? My name is Rodrigo, and this is Dapr in action. Today, we're going to have a learning checkpoint after 5 sessions. So let's get started, okay? So let's go through the materials right away. Dapr is a fantastic technology for creating distributed applications such as microservices. And in the Dapr.io website, you can find everything related to this fantastic technology. It's part of the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. It was originally created by Microsoft, but nowadays it's part of this CNCF. Um, so it allows you to create consistent and portable distributed applications. It's extensible, it's fantastic, it's glorious, and nowadays, we're about to have Dapr 1.15, I guess, sooner or later. And actually, let's go right here because I want to talk about the environment. Remember that you need to install Dapr, right? You need to download the Dapr CLI, and then you have to initialize Dapr. So let's go ahead and here in the terminal, you have to type something like Dapr init after you install the CLR. Of course, I have the CLI, not CLR, CLI right here. Um, you can see that I installed previously Dapr, and I have this version, which is version 1.14, I think. And this is actually the version that I'm running. Okay. So of course, you can go ahead and navigate to Dapr.io, and then you can click here in the Get Started button, and then click on Install the Dapr CLI. And if you're using Windows, like I do, then you need to run this particular script for installing Dapr. Okay, so I already did this. That's why I have the Dapr CLI. Then you have to initialize Dapr. And here is where the magic happens because this is the place, or this is the command that is going to download all the different components for Dapr. And you need to have installed Docker. Well, actually, you don't need to, but it's actually recommended. And of course, there's a Dapr option for initializing Dapr without using Docker. And as you can see here, I already initialized Dapr. So those Docker containers are running on my machine right now. Okay, so everything so far so good. And this is actually what you need to do to get started with Dapr. Okay. So I'm using .NET 9 and I'm using Docker Desktop. I can show you that here in this screen. You can see that Docker Desktop is running, right? And I'm using Visual Studio 2022, and I'm also using Visual Studio Code. There's a Dapr extension for Visual Studio Code for debugging purposes. I think that's perfect. And there's also an extension for Visual Studio 2022. And or you can always use any other kind of editor. But actually, this is the environment that we have in this Dapr in Action series. So you initialize Dapr, and then Dapr is going to be installed in this particular path. Let's go to this path. In this case, I'm using this other machine, as you can see. This is not my regular machine. And here you can find the .dapr folder, and inside the folder, you're going to find the bin folder that has all the binaries related to Dapr. And also you can find this components folder that has the default components for PubSub and the state management building blocks. And here you can also find this configuration where you can set some other things, some um, cross-cutting concerns about Dapr. So that's perfect. So you initialize Dapr. This is the command that you use if you don't have Docker, because let's be honest, sometimes you're not allowed to use Docker in your machine, or I don't know. Good evening, my friend Amandeep. And so everything is running perfectly, and so far so good. If you want to uninstall Dapr, then you can execute Dapr uninstall, and then this is going to uninstall the binaries. And if you want also to remove the containers, then you can pass that all flag, and that's it. So configuration is inside that config.yaml file that I showed you before. And this is the place where you can set some configuration, some cross-cutting concerns, such as tracing, metrics, logging, middlewares, and so on. So that configuration YAML file is magic, okay? We've been using that file a couple of times in this series. So you can see here on the screen, those tracing and metrics and logging, those elements are the locations where you specify the tracing configuration, metrics configuration, logging configuration, and so on. Okay. Hey, Abu. Hi there, my friend. So the Dapr CLI is actually the tool that you need to master in order to create great and fabulous Dapr um, solutions. And there are some commands related to the self-hosted mode that I've been using in this series. And there are some other commands for Kubernetes, because at the end of the day, Dapr can run as a sidecar container inside Kubernetes. And we're going to see that in a future chapter. So Dapr version for showing the Dapr runtime and CLI versions, and Dapr help, Dapr list for showing all the instances that are running, and Dapr dashboard. We've seen those commands already in this series. So yes, Dapr is fantastic, but of course it's not a programming language. It's a framework, right? For, well, actually it's a, yes, it's a framework. It's a hosting environment, and there is a series of different components. Um, so you need to run the sidecar somehow. As I've mentioned before, you can run Dapr as a sidecar container inside Kubernetes. But of course, if you're building a Dapr application, sometimes you need to run the sidecar by itself, right? This is the self-hosted mode that we use and we've been using in this series. So you need to specify the application identifier, say service 1, service B, service C, and then the Dapr HTTP port. In other words, the port number where the Dapr sidecar is going to expose the API for the HTTP protocol. And there's a gRPC port for exposing the API through that particular technology. So in other words, we can get access to Dapr by using HTTP or the gRPC technologies. And a port, this is the port number where your application is listening on. And then you need to specify # for your specific application instructions. For instance, if you're running .NET, then this is a place where you pass .NET Run and all the flags that your application needs, such as URLs and so on. So there's an example here on the screen that I've been using most of the time in this series, okay? Perfect. So we can also run multiple apps at the same time. This is similar to a Docker Compose file. We need to create this dapr.yaml file inside the directory. And then you can specify all the different applications that you want to run at the same time. This is magic, right? This is great, such as Docker Compose, right? instead of running each application separately. So this is the schema for that particular Dapr.yaml file. And by the way, the name can be just any other name. And but actually the default value is Dapr.yaml. So this is the place you can see here on the screen that this YAML file is specifying two applications, web app and backend, and each application with different resources paths, application ports, and so on, right? Fantastic, fantastic things. And you can execute the Dapr.yaml file if it happens to be named that way, Dapr run, and then just pass the directory path. And if you happen to have another YAML file, I mean, you renamed it or you used another name, then you just pass the file path for that particular YAML file. So, and this is perfect. In Dapr, the sidecar is exposing this API, but actually, I don't think it's real world just to, send requests and expect responses from the API. Most of the time, friends, you want to use an official SDK. That's why our friends from Dapr, they create those SDKs. So let's use those SDKs in our applications. Okay, so there's an SDK for .NET. There's an SDK for Python and Java and Go and some other programming languages. And maybe you're using, I don't know, this very obscure programming language. In that particular case, yes, you need to send some requests and expect some responses. So as long as your programming language supports HTTP or gRPC, you're good to go, okay? So if you happen to be using .NET, as I do, then you can use the Dapr SDK for .NET, of course, and you need to use the Dapr client object for sending requests and retrieve the responses from the sidecar. So Dapr client is the way to go. If you happen to be using ASP.NET Core, then you need to register Dapr by using add Dapr. You can see that here on the screen. And then you can inject the Dapr client object in your controllers. And then you can use all of the different methods that the Dapr client object exposes. So that's perfect, and that's the intro for this learning checkpoint. Let's get started with the PubSub building block that allows you to send asynchronously some messages between components, right? Because sometimes you have distributed applications that are, that they have different services or microservices. So you need to know when something happens in this other service, right? So you need to react somehow when some event happened in service A. You want service B and service C and service D to react somehow, okay? I'm sorry. So let's use the PubSub building block, and with the Dapr client object is a breeze. You can actually do it quite easily, okay? So this particular diagram shows the PubSub component in action. You have a service that sends or publishes an event, and then you have other services that are subscribed to that particular event, right? And if you want to use the API directly, which I do not recommend, as I've mentioned before, you can use those endpoints that are here on the screen. So let's get started. Let's say that I have this Dapr in action folder, and I want to create a .NET solution for a fictitious hospital, okay? So we're going to have two microservices. One microservice is for the patients all things patients, the names of the patient, the ID of the patient, the age, the birth date, and so on. And this other microservice named consultations for all things related to consultations, such as start a consultation between a patient and a doctor, and give me the full doctor's catalog or specialties and so on. So just two microservices, okay? So I can start like, I don't know, start and .NET New, right? Solution, hospital, and then .NET New Web API, hospital dot patients use controllers because controllers are fantastic, and then use this same command for creating consultations, and then .NET solution add hospital consultations and patients, both of them in the same solution, .NET solution list. So far so good, nothing fancy here, just a solution with two web API projects, right? So in the interest of time, I happen to have that here, okay? So this is the initial implementation. So you can see that I have weather forecast controller and that, this famous weather forecast class that the template includes. So anyway, we need to use Dapr somehow. That's why you need to add Dapr here. So what you do is you go to the Manage NuGet Packages panel and then search for Dapr. And you can here in ASP.NET Core add this NuGet package reference. And as you can see at the time of this recording, the latest version is 1.14. Okay, so you install this, right? And you do the same with this other microservice. Oh my God. Well, so you can do the same here. I'm just copying package reference because CSproj files are glorious. And then you need to, implement the logic that you wanna implement and you wanna expose in your services, right? So for instance, in the patients API, I want to expose an endpoint for creating patients and another endpoint for grabbing the patients, right? For querying the patients. I'm gonna close this other tab. Okay, so good. Let's go back here. And I want to use some kind of database. So I think it's going to be fine if we just use the Entity Framework Core, the in-memory provider, Microsoft Entity Framework Core, in memory, right? So I can install this and then create the DB context, create the entity classes, and configure the DB context and so on, right? For example, I want to, I don't know, maybe right here, doesn't matter right now, public class, and then patients, DB context, and then I want to inherit from DB context, right? And then I need to pass DB context options that takes a patient's DB context. And I want to create a new record for patients, right? Such as, or class, right? Patient, and then ID, right? And then the name or first name and last name. Then I need to configure here, you know, services, add DB context, just regular ASP.NET Core things and Entity Framework Core things. But of course, I don't want to waste time on that. I mean, those are perfect. However, I want to show you other things. Um, so let me um, undo changes. And here, undo changes. I think it doesn't matter if I do undo changes. Anyway, let me show you this other branch named initial. Again, in the interest of time, I've already implemented a lot of things. So I have the patient's controller, right, for creating a patient, and then for grabbing patients. You can see that I created a new record named new patient. That is the payload for creating a new patient. And I'm using the DB context. And you can see that I'm sorry, I included Dapr here, and I'm invoking a DB context. So nothing fancy. What I want to do is I want to notify, I'm sorry. Oh my God, I've been um, struggling with my voice and coughing in the past hours. So nothing fancy here. I just want to use the Dapr client to notify consultations when a new patient is created. Why? Because those two microservices, they have their own database. I think that's fine for most of the time when you're using microservices. But what happens? Let's think about this. Um, let's think about a consultation. Oh my God. I'm sorry about that. Anyway, so when a consultation happens between a patient and a doctor, as you can see here, I'm receiving this as the payload, right? Patient and doctor. So I know the ID of the patient, right? However, I don't know the name of the patient, since the source of truth for patients must be patient's API. In other words, this other microservice, right? So I need a way between microservices to store some kind of cache. And that's actually what I'm going to do here. And I have this code that I've been working with. So you can see here on the patient's controller, when I create a patient, right? Let's say Stephen Simon. I create this patient named Stephen Simon, and then I want to publish the event to this particular uh, pops up component, and then the name of the topic, and then the payload. This is the only thing that you need to do in order to use the pops up building block. On the other hand, here on the other microservice, inside the consultations controller, I have this public method that is decorated with the topic attribute. Again, I'm using the same pops up component in the same topic. And I'm specifying, hey, you know what? I want this payload, which is the patient ID, first name and last name. This is it. This is actually it. There's nothing else you can do or you should do in order to receive that patient object. Can you see what's happening here? So patient is going to send asynchronously that event, and this guy is, waiting for messages in the pops up component. And when there's a new message, it's going to grab the object, it's going to grab the message, right? And it's going to deserialize that message into this strongly typed object. And I'm going to use that for inserting the patient in the database. Make sense? So let's go here And let's see if this is working actually. So learning checkpoint, I'm in this branch, and my plan is to finish the entire application if we don't have enough time today. And I'm gonna finalize and end this implementation with 4 building blocks. And I'm gonna actually send that and store this in my GitHub account. Perfect. Oh my God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, cool. So let's open up this one, and I can say Dapr run. This is the consultations service, right? App ID, it's going to be consultations, and then Dapr HTTP port, let's say 56,000. App port is going to be 5600, and then .NET run URLs, HTTP, and then port. This one. So this is working. Let me end this since I want to execute this in this other folder. Since I didn't create the dapr.yaml file, that's something missing here. Dapr in action. So source, and then learning checkpoint, patience API. So this is going to be patience, and I don't know, 56,001. This other here, and this, right? So what I'm doing now is I'm running the sidecar alongside the application, right? And right at this moment, you can go ahead and execute Dapr list, so you can see all the different applications that are running. You can also execute Dapr dashboard, just like this. And let me show you the Dapr dashboard, so we can easily see all the different applications that are running right now. Make sense? Perfect. So far so good. Let's see if this is working. For example, patience is running here. I just want to add a patient. That's why I'm using the application port. Okay. And let's send Stephen Simon. So it returns the ID, the newly created ID for Stephen Simon. Okay. Let's add this other patient. And this is returning 2. Nothing fancy here. And this other endpoint for grabbing all the different patients. So it's working, right? So the thing is that when I created those 2 patients, I wanted the consultations microservice to react and store the patients into its own database. Okay. Did I do that correctly? Well, actually, I don't know. Let's stop this and this other as well. So let's go back to Visual Studio. And here, I'm just, well, yes, it looks like I already implemented the code. I'm obtaining the patient and then storing the patient in the DB context. Let me show you the DB context. I'm sorry, I'm coughing very often right now. And yes, I have my own patients. Is this the most perfect design microservices solution? Of course, it isn't. But I'm actually respecting the, the private database um, principle for microservices. In other words, this microservice has its own storage. And it's fine when you use and you create distributed applications when you repeat you're repeating the the models here. I'm sorry. I'm actually struggling a lot with my voice right now. Anyway, it's fine if consultations have its own patient storage. However, just remember, in a microservices solution, there must be something or one single source of truth for the data. In this case, the patient's microservice is the I'm sorry. I think we're gonna cut out this session for today and continue in the next week. Since I'm really struggling, friends. I'm choking right in front of you, which is it's exciting. Well, it isn't. Um, anyway, just remember this: its own private storage, and the thing is that I want to, store its own patients. So let's try again. Consultations, and then this other one, and let's go ahead and open up Postman. Let's duplicate this. Consultations, patients. So first, let's create this patient, and then Stephen Simon. 2 patients, right? 2 patients here, and 2 patients were created, and I need to return those patients here since I should receive those messages. So somehow the serialization is not working right now. I'm sorry, I have other things to show you, but actually I'm choking. So this is going to be part 1 of the learning checkpoint. And thank you for your understanding. And I'm going to cut out. I'm going to finish this session right now. And see you next week with the second learning checkpoint, okay?